Well, hello, everyone. I'm Melissa Lazara, the Director of Marketing at Mindprint Learning, and we are so happy that you've joined us today. We know Fridays are a difficult time, especially midday, and so we're just so thankful that you've taken time out of your busy schedule to join us, and you are not going to be disappointed. We have a fantastic panel today. So thank you for joining us to the webinar, Back on Track, Embracing the Science of Learning to Accelerate Math Outcomes. Today's webinar is brought to you by Mindprint Learning. And in case you're new to our Science of Learning series, Mindprint Learning is the only strengths-based MTSS solution empowering teachers and students with learning strategies matched to unique cognitive strengths. We have dashboards for administrators, and we're going to hear from a superintendent and assistant superintendent today that are going to talk to you a little bit about how they're leveraging this data for accelerating math outcomes. I'll be introducing our guest speakers in just a minute. But here's a few housekeeping items. I'm going to go ahead and advance the slide here. Today's webinar will be recorded. You'll receive an email next week with the recording as well as any resources that are shared today. So please go ahead and feel free to share that with any of your colleagues or friends that you think would benefit from hearing today's webinar. Susan Michelle is with us today, our Director of Learning, and she's also our in-house math expert, and she'll be fielding all of the questions in the Q&A. Which prompts me to tell you that the chat has been disabled, and so any questions that you have, go ahead and put those in the Q&A section, and we'll either answer them live, or if we feel like they could benefit the audience as a whole, we'll save those till the end for our Q&A section. The presentation is going to be about 45 minutes long. We're going to break it up pretty much into thirds, and then reserve that last 15 minutes for questions. We are fortunate to have a terrific panel today. I gotta say, not only are these great leaders in the education space, but just fabulous people to hang out with and to prepare for this webinar. And sometimes we get to run into each other at conferences, and that's always great too. So we have Leanne Wenzel, superintendent at Ridley School District over in Pennsylvania. And then we have Greg Hall, who's assistant superintendent in South Carolina at Florence One School District. Dr. Greg King wasn't able to join us today, but we have CEO and one of our, Nancy Weinstein, who's the founder of Mindprint Learning and is also one of the lead investigators on several National Science Foundation research projects. So we are really excited to have the three of them here today to talk to you about how to accelerate math outcomes. Let me go on to the agenda, and we'll go ahead and cover that. So we'll start off with Nancy, and we'll talk about the science of learning math. Then we'll hear from our other panelists about the specific actions that districts can take to understand and close math gaps. We'll also go over a few key steps to making data accessible and actionable, and how that gets implemented at a district-wide, site-wide, classroom-wide level. And then we'll wrap it up with some Q&A. So without further ado, I'd like to invite our CEO and founder of Mindprint Learning, Nancy. Go ahead and take it away.
Thank you all so much for being here, and thank you to our amazing panelists. I'm going to try and be brief as I talk about the science of learning math, because I really want you to hear from Greg and Leanne, who've done such an amazing job with this work. But I can't do that without first emphasizing, talking about why the science of math is so important. I know there's been such a focus on the science of reading, particularly in the past couple of years. That is amazing. But the science of math skills are 21st century skills. And if we want our students to be ready for the new economy, what we're talking about today is exactly where we need to focus. And I think you're going to see that raising math outcomes is going to be a little bit easier than we think about, given the challenge we've had on achievement outcomes. And I'm going to focus on the science, but keeping in mind that the science is just a pathway to get to the right strategies and the right approaches to see the achievement. So we're going to start with the science so you know the why, but the really important thing is what Greg and Leanne are going to talk about in the how we do it. So with that, next slide, Melissa. Thank you. So we're going to talk about cognitive skills specifically and why we put such an emphasis on understanding those skills. And then back to strategies. You'll always hear me say that. Let's talk about what we actually can do to improve outcomes, and always, when we can, think about students' strengths. Let's not go to the deficit model, thinking about a strengths-based approach. So next slide. Okay, so why do we talk about cognitive skills and why do we think they're so important? Here's a graph. For over 50 years of research, the numbers come out roughly the same. Cognitive skills account for approximately 50% of the variability in outcomes, right? So the other two key factors, math curriculum and instruction, good teaching, good content, social emotional learning, math mindsets, motivation, super important. But cognitive skills is this one piece where we tend not to focus, and yet it explains about 50% of the variability. And so that's why we're going to focus on that today. So if you can, thank you. So when we talk about cognitive skills, these are the skills that we're talking about. The ones that are in the darker pink, those are the primary skills. So when you look at the research and say, what 4 things make the biggest difference in understanding why students don't understand math or are struggling in math? Those are the 4. And we're going to talk about them a bit on the next page. But right now, the 3 in light pink, those, think about those as the secondary. So they're important. And if students are still struggling in math and we've addressed those other 4, then we want to start to dig into those other 3. But for most students, most of the time, if we can understand where their strengths and needs are in those 4, we know how to teach them and help them learn and enjoy math. So next slide. Okay, so those 4 skills, if you couldn't see them on the other slide, the first 3 are our complex reasoning skills, how we understand and take in new information, right? So 3 big skills, we can all learn in different ways. We all have a strength, a best way to do it, a best way to understand something that's hard and complicated or feels hard and complicated like math. Abstract reasoning, think pictures. If I see a picture, I understand it. Show me the picture and I'll get it. Verbal reasoning, words. Explain it to me. Tell me a story. Tell me an example, right? Some of us learn better with words. Some of us learn better with pictures. One is neither better than the other, but often we present it to students in one way, and that's why they feel like they can't get math. And then the third one are spatial skills. So that's sort of like, how can you vision things in the mind's eye? So when students are struggling to understand, those are the students who really need models and hands-on tools, right? That's their understanding. Those 3 things, if we can understand why students aren't doing math, we can look at those 3 things. We can understand why and what to do about it. And then the 4th one is working memory, which is a fancy name to say short-term memory. Like, can I do multi-step math in my head? That's a perfect example of how we use working memory. If you can't do that and that's hard for you, it sometimes feels like you can't do math because students want to do things in their head on paper. So if I can't keep it in my head on paper, if I can't keep it in my head, I put it on paper and I can address it. But those are the 4 skills. And if we get to those 4, we know how to help just about every student learn math. So next slide. So this is in case you don't believe me, but this is a graph that shows we took one of our schools and we just broke down. We said, first, let's look at the students who are proficient in math, who are doing well on those state achievements and those interim assessments and doing well in school. And we took those 4 same cognitive skills I just showed you on the other page: visual reasoning, verbal reasoning, spatial reasoning, and working memory. And those proficient students, you can see they are all very high in those 3 complex reasoning skills. And even though they're struggling a little bit in working memory, they're proficient, right? It's not a coincidence. Now we're going to look at the students who are not proficient. Same bars, look at those students. What you see is that we broke them into 2 groups, but those in both of those groups, look at that second bar on both of them, that verbal reasoning. Those students are struggling with verbal reasoning, and that's what's holding them back in math. And now that we understand that, we can see that they have stronger visual reasoning, and even that group in green, their working memory is good. We can leverage that to show them how to do math. And so when we think about supporting students in math, we don't have to think about just their scores, because typically what schools will do is group those green and orange students together because they're not proficient. And Mindprint would say, we got to look at those skills, because that's those students in that group in green, if we can leverage their visual reasoning strengths, they can be math people and they can love math. And then the students in the orange are going to need another set of strategies, but we want to break them up. And so that just shows, one, the correlation, why these cognitive skills are so important, but then what do we do about it? And so next slide. This is what we do. We give students strategies to teach to their strengths. So if your students are stronger in visual reasoning, we give them models and pictures. And we have our strategies freely available to you if you want to leverage them. But things your teachers need to know, but to know which students need to start with those pictures and those models, as opposed to explaining something and asking them to read the textbook. And then you have your students with stronger verbal reasoning, and they need pictures and words and the stories, right? In that case, you saw most of those students really were going to do better with the pictures on that last slide. But there were students that were stronger in verbal reasoning there, right? And there are schools where more of your students are going to be stronger in verbal reasoning. Knowing which strategy, your math teachers know both these strategies, but they need to know which students should get which strategies. And then we have our other strategy around working memory, completely different type of strategy. What do you do for a student who doesn't want to do their work on paper, but they have weak working memory? We need to give them a checklist and remind them what to do and make sure they're doing their work on paper, right? And you saw that even our strong group, here's strategies. This is how we can treat every group of students and elevate our proficient students too. Of course, they can all grow. They might need the strategy for working memory. And so that's how we hope you will think about cognitive variability and teaching students math to their strengths. And I think those were my slides, and I think I might even be on time.
No, you did a great job. Thank you. And so it really begs the question, okay, we're kind of getting a taste for how we can use this cognitive data to really understand where the challenges might lie and how to support these students. But what can, my question to the panelists is, what can district leaders do? So, Greg, do you want to, I don't know if you want to chime in and talk about this? I know, you and Leanne had put together kind of a high level view of what district leaders can do. And then maybe share your stories after that. So,
Sure.
Greg, yeah.
Thanks, Melissa and Nancy. Certainly appreciate the opportunity to be here and share a little bit about our story. But absolutely, with this information that Mindprint can unlock for us, and I guess I first want to acknowledge, everybody that's here on this webinar today clearly has some kind of an interest in how do we improve our outcomes for our students in math. And that's exactly where we were a year and a half ago when we got introduced. And, we were just trying to figure out what works because we kept doing this same cycle of try to improve teaching instructional strategies for math, try to improve instructional strategies for math, and small group this, and strategy and intervention that, and it was so content specific, and it never seemed to move the needle for us, and so we were just trying to figure out, and our struggles are not unique to Florence, South Carolina. Our struggles across this country clearly are showing significant and serious concerns in math. And so what Mindprint can help with this cognitive data and learning variability data, it can unlock a number of things for us that can tell us or can suggest for us that we can do a handful of things. Certainly, we can begin to identify cognitive strengths and opportunities for growth in our students. When we know more about the learner, we can certainly be better about reaching them and how they learn, not necessarily what they learn, but how they learn and do that. We can certainly take a look at 1, 2, 3 small changes in tier 1, that classroom level interaction, and improve the instructional approach based on data. When we talk differentiation, we can be much more strategic. We can talk about teacher training centered around cognitive skills and the science of learning that is really backed by information about the learner and unlock some information for our teacher professional growth that can make them more effective in this job that they do every single day. We can certainly work towards individualizing our instructional approaches to our students and individualizing these strategies based on the learner, rather than just what some research says that this is an effective instructional strategy. But if it is not effective towards that learner and their cognitive skills, it might not produce the intended result. And then by all means, specific actions to understand that we can glean from this information is monitoring and evaluating student progress. We can constantly see our students move in a lot of different ways, not just the test scores, but in a lot of other metrics I'm sure that you're going to hear about as we talk through today.
Thank you, Craig. So at a high level, these are the kind of 5 things that district leaders can do. And then let's take it a little bit deeper and talk about, how do you make data accessible and actionable at your district? So
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah, I'll be happy to share a little bit about our story. We started in Florence One. A very, very quick overview of who we are. We're a district of about 16,000 students, a pre-K through 8. A pre-K through 12 district. And we hover around 70% poverty, and we're a majority district. So majority of our students are African American, mixed race, or Hispanic, and so we do struggle with a lot of rural and suburban challenges and poverty challenges that a lot of districts across the nation do, and math is one of those things that we've been looking at now for several years. And so when we found Mindprint, we started a pilot implementation in our middle grades at 2 of our 4 middle schools. And when we did that, we launched about mid-year during the 22-23 school year. And what we found was that initial aha when we did this survey, we got our student data back. What that unlocked for us and the data that was revealed to us about our learners completely woke us up to we're doing so many things wrong. And when we're talking about strategies, because we have been beating ourselves up from the district level to the instructional coordinator level to the school administration level down through our PLCs. We are just wearing our educators out on content-based strategies and differentiation strategies that are really just not moving the needle. And we were scratching our heads trying to figure out what are we missing here. And so when we did these surveys and we first of all got the data before we even started training, what we learned was we're missing the mark on where we're putting our energy on trying to improve instruction. And it's not a content problem. Our teachers know content. We're missing the mark on engaging learners. If when we walked around classrooms, we would see such disengagement of our students, students disengaged from the teacher, disengaged from the instructional activities, very laissez-faire just about the importance of education. And a lot of times our natural response is to blame the kid, well, they just don't care and whatever that may be. And we were just trying to figure out how do we wake this up? And what we were learning from this initial data is that's not the case at all. What we're failing to do is properly and effectively reach students in ways that their brain naturally connects. And in doing so, as we initially started the implementation, what we focused on was trying to get our teachers to understand the cognitive skill and the cognitive learning data, and trying to help them understand the mind shift of what differentiation really is supposed to look like when we talk about learner style and learner variability, and understanding helping students access based on that information. So we started shifting and training with our adults, because our adults are the ones that are the keepers of the information and are challenged with engaging the students. So that's where we started. And within that first semester, we saw a significant change in those teachers and even those classrooms. We started to see engagement shift. We saw engagement on the positive. We saw teachers starting to ask more questions and being more mindful now of the learner, rather than just focusing on what that outcome is, rather than looking at a module assessment score or a benchmark score. They were now a little more mindful of the learner, and it started shifting their thinking about what it is they do and how to do that. That's really the light bulb for us when we saw that, and we saw those classrooms look and feel different when we walked through. Those were our initial metrics that we looked for and loved, that turned us on to say, we're going to now extend this into all 4 of our middle schools, which we did this year, expanded to all 4 of our middle schools. I want to show you the next slide, which was the data that we received back, some of the data that we received back from our fall assessment of this year, our fall assessment of this year from all 4 middle schools. And from the cognitive skills listed across the bottom, to kind of help you understand this chart, if it's in red, that's a skill to support. If it's in the blue-green, that's a relative strength. The green lines are kind of where the norm lines are. And when we looked at this data, this is literally our data. This is Florence One's middle school data from all four middle schools from this fall when we assessed our students. We got this data back, and you can see what I see, which is working memory, verbal memory, and visual memory, along with flexible thinking. Over, roughly, I'm going to summarize, 50% of our students struggle significantly with those 4 skills. And when we looked at that, at our district level assessment team, when we were looking at that, the superintendent and I and the coordinators, we almost chuckled a little bit, and we thought of these stories when we're walking through classrooms, and we're thinking of these just frustrated teachers talking about these experiences where they have literally poured hours and hours and hours into trying to improve instruction. They've taught the lesson of their life for standing there for 20 or 25 minutes and doing an amazing direct instruction that has their visuals and has all of these things. And it gets down to the moment for them to turn it over to the kids and the kids to start working. And what happens? Inevitably, a kid raises their hand and says, "What are we supposed to do?" And the teacher loses their mind because they thought that this kid has been completely disengaged, and now this is a behavior of intentional disruption or complete lack of concern. But this data suggests otherwise. This data suggests that this kid literally struggles with working memory or verbal memory. If our sages on the stages have spent 30 minutes proving how smart they are as a teacher, our kids have completely lost it. And that's not because the kids are incapable of understanding math. We've just delivered it to them in a strategy that they're not strong in. Flexible thinking also impressed us in looking at that as a weakness. And I'm going to touch on that on this next slide in just a second. But remember this, when we're looking at the struggles of our students in math, and really our students in general, our instructional practices generally have been targeted around an expectation that students can be strong and successful in visual memory. What do? We put pictures up all around our room and word walls and anchor charts. But if they're not strong in visual memory skills, and they certainly aren't strong in working memory or verbal memory, it's really been a challenge for our students. And so we've been shifting. That was our first aha. We've got to change our PLC mindset to equip our teachers with skills on how to present information mindful of students that struggle with working memory. That doesn't mean that they're incapable. That means we have to engage them with different strategies. Next slide. So this is a little more detail about our 4 middle schools. So you see, again, the highlighted points here. In general, our working memory, verbal memory and visual memory were pretty weak for us, but also the flexible thinking. Now, mind you, this is not just our low performing students. This is all of our students, GT kids, students taking high school level courses in 8th grade. This is all of our students, and they're struggling with these skills. 50% of our students are struggling with flexible thinking. What does that mean to us? When we initially started learning that, this suggests that students could face challenges in taking feedback or thinking differently. What do we learn about assessments? Where do our students struggle the most? When we analyzed our data, and it may be the same for you, when we look at students, when we get past DOK 1, when we get into DOK 2 and 3, and they have to take something such as a math skill, a math formula, whatever, and apply it in a greater context, it blows their mind, and we see them struggle. No kidding, right? When we understand that our students, 50% of our students struggle with flexible thinking, but they're struggling the most with things like DOK 2 and 3, it makes perfect sense to us now. And so we had to completely shift how we approach our students. What have we seen? We've seen significant difference. Improvements in our fall and winter benchmarks. So for instance, this year, our winter benchmarks, our growth from fall to winter have been anywhere from 8 to 15 percentage points higher than the last several years, than the last 3 years. Our winter benchmarks have been anywhere from 8 to 15 percentage points higher than the growth that we saw fall to winter in the last 3 years. Our student scoring, the percent of student scoring meets or exceeds in the winter at our winter benchmark time is 20% higher for our 8th grade this year, this winter, on our winter benchmark than our students at this time last year. 7th and 8th grade are also in around 10%, 10 to 12% higher than where they were student scoring meets and exceeds at this time at the winter benchmark last year. Our state assessments, we were proud last year to report that our middle grades, where we had only implemented 2 of our schools, but our middle grades, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade math summative assessment scores showed a positive growth in our percent meets and exceeds, anywhere from 1% to right at 5%. More students scoring meets and exceeds last year in our state math assessment. While it's embargoed right now, I do have our preliminary results for this year, and I can also share that this year's state summative assessments are showing a similar trend, somewhere in excess of somewhere around 5%. We're expecting to see a positive gain of more students scoring meets and exceeds. And a lot of this has to do with our instructional practices that have focused on the learners. And we're early. We're very early in this implementation, but we've been very intentional in working with our teachers around understanding the learner and focusing our professional learning around strategies to improve engagement. And we've seen that, and it seems to be paying off for us here in Florence 1.
That's so exciting, Greg. I mean, we just so appreciate you sharing those. And I think sometimes just, having that data in front of us really solidifies the importance of doing this. And you guys have just done such a terrific job in empowering your teachers and it sounds like, really empowering your students too, with the level of engagement and performance that's happening. So bravo, great job. Thank you for sharing the story. We also have Leanne, superintendent over at Ridley School District, who's going to share her story as well. And I know that our audience is going to have all kinds of questions. So I want to make sure that we're reserving time at the end here and make sure we have at least 10 minutes to get to those. So without further ado, Leanne, could you share your story? You've been doing this and accessing this kind of data a little bit longer. So go ahead and tell us how long you've been taking this approach.
Definitely a little bit longer. And Melissa, feel free to move slides as you wish. Don't force me to tell you to move. You can move me to keep us on time. But Greg used a key word, and that's engagement. Our process started with Mindprint a little bit longer because we came upon Mindprint during the portion of our comprehensive planning that we were already looking at the science of learning, not for content, but just basic brain science and neuroscience research that was out there, and tying it to our personalized learning plan that we were trying to move down that path. So Ridley School District is classified as a suburban school district. We are just south of the sixth largest city in the country, Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. So we are really considered a first ring suburb of really two urban centers, Chester City, as well as the city of Philadelphia. So we have a shift in terms of what we have seen in our population. We have a 40% minority population, and we're over 50% in free and reduced lunch. Our EL population actually has doubled in our time as in my 34 years in the district. So that's been an interesting shift for us. And that was part of our push that we really started to look at this shift for personalized learning and looking at that student engagement. So it became interesting to us to start to look at Mindprint. Where does this fit with our professional learning model for our staff? We started with our staff and we started at the middle level as well. Sometimes we like to start things here in the middle and be able to get those roots started and then grow in both directions. So our personal learning choice model, we had teachers take the assessment themselves so that they understood their learning, as well as what do the reports look like and what would that mean for their instructional practices once our students took the assessment. So we did start in sixth grade. We were fortunate. We have a block of time in our middle school that is an intervention enrichment period in which we started some of the boost work with our students that took the assessment. Our high school was getting a little jealous with our initial implementation, and our soon-to-be high school principal, as our high school principal was retiring, one of our assistants said, well, we want in on this. So we then grew it to our ninth grade at our high school. And they're utilizing some of the boost work, the coursework to support this for students to understand how they can perform better in what we call as Raider time, which is a block of time before our academic courses start. When we look at what were observable differences in the mathematics classroom, our teachers significantly changed their approach to preparing based upon what they learned from the Mindprint data. Much like Nancy shared, those green and orange groups, they're math people. Charts make sense to them. It was an aha moment for them once they started to look at, this makes sense to us. We understand we need to do something different. So when they started to look where they could get their greatest potential for success, they implemented more visual representations of mathematic concepts and created more opportunities for repetitive learning. They realized they needed to support those opportunities for flexible thinking, but they also needed to organize their lessons to focus on specific types of problems to reduce the need to switch between different concepts. So they really started to re-examine how they were delivering their mathematics instruction in the classroom based upon those results. The overcoming of skepticism is something we face no matter what it is, whether it's math or not. And whenever that new initiative is in place, being able for people to understand and experience what they see in their classroom helps you get over that hump. And because people saw some significant changes based upon what students were now starting to do, we had great encouragement of people wanting to be part of this and take part of it, which is why it went up to the high school so quickly. We actually have switched at our middle school that this year, the boost courses aren't just part of the intervention and enrichment block. They actually have shifted and are part of a full course that we're teaching called strategies that are part of our specials rotation in our schedule to make sure that we're revisiting these skills so students have more ownership of how they learn and making sure they take more advantage of these opportunities. So as we look at moving forward, we have branched out to our high school. We now are also going to shift. Next year, we're going to start with all third graders, starting with the assessment. And I was speaking with one of my elementary counselors yesterday who took one of the professional development sessions on Mindprint. Even though she wasn't using it at the elementary school at the time, she's excited to hear what possibilities now await the elementary by implementing it at the elementary level.
Yeah, and so Leanne, you'd mentioned the boost course a couple times, and I'm thinking our audience may not even know what the boost course is, or is that something separate? Could you just give a little bit of an overview of the boost course and how it's being implemented?
So our staff have worked with Mindprint to take advantage of learning resources that are available through Mindprint for students to understand the strategies that are going to give them more success. So we are a one-to-one district. Our students, wherever we schedule it within their day, they're able to take advantage of these particular courses that align to what they need to learn in terms of having more success as a learner.
Great. Yeah. And so, and just so the audience knows, in terms of what we've been talking about today, there's the Mindprint assessment, right, that you're deploying every, in third grade, now in third grade, sixth grade, and ninth grade, right, every 3 years. And then the strategies that are aligned specifically to that data. And then Greg kind of talked about the overview and how we can differentiate based on the classroom or strategies that can be deployed across district-wide, depending on the strengths and areas of support. And so that boost course then can come in at middle school and high school, and is sort of a turnkey, just so our audience knows, is a turnkey course focused on developing learner agency. And so a student beginning to really learn about who they are as a learner and the strategies that they can use to serve them well across any content. And so I love that. I love how you're incorporating that into that that homeroom timer. What'd you call it again, Leanne?
At the high school, it's Raider time. At
Raider time, that's it.
the middle school, it's IE, intervention and enrichment.
Gotcha. Awesome. Well, we've got some key takeaways that our panelists have put together. You've heard of a lot of exciting actions that these two districts have done to support teachers and to support the learners on their campuses. But I'd love for you guys to just share, Greg, if you want to go first and just share some key takeaways from this experience.
Sure, and I'll keep it brief, so we certainly have time for questions. But one of the biggest things, this has been a little bit of the mantra we've used since we've kind of been enlightened to this information, is our challenging or our challenge or the gap that has been identified more of a teaching gap, not a learning gap. So what we've observed is more of an issue with what we have failed to do in building bridges to learning through teaching strategies. And so low achievement may be better associated with misaligned strategies to teach content. As I referenced earlier, we've spent so much time trying to teach content better. Well, the kids aren't necessarily misunderstanding the content. We're not engaging their cognitive learning styles and engaging them in a way that's getting them interested and engaged in the content. And so what we've been really focusing on is more effective practices to do that and focus on the engagement. We have seen that engagement change already in 18 months. In 3 quick semesters, we've already seen a difference. I will, in case it's one of the questions going to come up, is this a 100%? Has every single middle school teacher embraced this and championing this? No, we have some resistance to learning because teachers get comfortable in what they do. And so our work is around the adults right now and helping encourage and provoke and prompt this mind shift in their instructional practices, because this is really how we change what our environment looks like for our kids. And as I already shared, our winter benchmark data, and so we're just excited to start to see this embrace this shift, this slow shift, and the results that are showing, the positive results that are showing because of this shift and emphasizing our strategies around learner variability.
Excellent, Greg. Thank you for sharing that. Leanne, and I'll slide over to your key takeaways, and then we do have some questions in the Q&A that are sort of prompted off of what you guys have just been talking about. So I'm excited to share those with you.
So if we look at our concrete data, since our middle school has been engaged the longest in the process, Our sixth grade is 14.4% higher than the state average. And Pennsylvania's state assessment is not known for a high percentage to begin with, so we want to do better. But in the past, I would say we were supporting even lowering that average. Now, after we've put this in place, we've seen our data actually shows from the state assessments that we're seeing some significant change at our middle level. The sixth grade, if you just look at sixth grade to sixth grade, it was an 8% increase. If you follow the cohort from sixth grade to seventh grade, they had a 7.6% increase for the cohort. And overall for our middle school all total, and we didn't have everybody all engaged at the same time, we've still seen a 7.7% increase in mathematic performance at the middle school. So that's been exciting for us. At our high school, we have our state test is called the Keystone, and we're early in the implementation at the high school. However, it has been a positive change looking at from the 23-20 to the 24 winter results for algebra. We saw a 0.75% increase in advanced and proficient cohorts. And the other students are moving up in their quartile. So that's something we've always strived. And these are achievement improvements. They don't reflect the improvements we've seen in growth on top of that.
That's amazing. That's so great. Leanne, we do have a question that came in that talked a little bit like about why you started at middle school. Can you expand a little bit on that?
So in a number of initiatives we've done in this district, middle school sometimes is that tough nut to loosen. And if you have success in middle school, everybody else is like, well, middle school, you had success, so why don't we get to try it? And we like the opportunity to grow in two directions. And it actually accelerated faster than we thought it was going to. Plus, you know, middle school people, sometimes they need to be that shining star because they don't always, they usually get the hand-me-downs, right? Start at the high school, then we go to the middle school, or it comes the other way. So it's nice to give them the opportunity to actually jump and take the lead on something and have some success that others then want to be in on.
And Melissa, I'll add to that. We also we initiated in our middle schools as well for some of the same reasons. Our middle school achievement data is generally comparative to elementary school is for some reason always been lower. And so we wanted to kind of put some strategies and emphasis into some area that we've always seen as significantly lower or somewhat lower achievement outcomes. And so we put that energy there. In our schools, our middle schools also don't have all of the intervention resources that our elementary schools do. We don't have nearly the interventionist nor necessarily the schedule that kind of facilitates intervention blocks like elementary might have. And so it's a little more challenging. And so we wanted to try to open up some information that could make our teachers who have the students more effective in that kind of going back to that tier one, right? Tier one strategies really could change the game for middle school if we really understand improving instructional strategies that are aligned to cognitive learning styles. And so that's kind of where why we chose middle school and where we've been looking.
Yeah. And Melissa, do you want me to answer the boost question about one more thing on a teacher's to-do list?
Yeah, please do.
So Molly, you know, that would be my concern as well. I don't want to just keep adding things on the plate, but that's why we found, you know, we're not intending right now in terms of where Boost might or might not fit at the elementary. Boost at the elementary really will be much more for the actual teachers to change performance. From there, the other levels have time periods that are actually built into the day, that it's not an add-on, it's within the students, and the work that's being done is for students, so they're fully engaged.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's helpful to hear. And we did have another question that said, can you talk a little bit more about the support the teachers received around implementing the data? Like, how big of a lift was it? I don't know if either one of you want to take that.
Yeah, and Nancy, you can chime in because you helped us with this, and so did Mary. For me, it was no lift because I had a good team that really saw what was there, and our professional staff, as Greg used the word, it was an aha. Like, they looked at it and it caused them to take a step back and think. But in terms of actually presenting the data to staff, I don't know, Nancy, if you want to chime in about our resistance and our acceptance.
I will say that we found that the math teachers were had higher acceptance because they like to look at the data, and they saw the data and it was like, oh my God, like this makes perfect sense and this is what we need to do. I will say with the ELA teachers, it was a slightly bigger lift, but when we presented it, you could see the patterns in the data, right? So even when we were let's go back to talking about that graph that I showed where you had this disproportionality with strong visual reasoning skills and weaker verbal skills. In some ways, the teachers don't need to dig into the data and resist. If you can say to them, the English teachers, use the graphic organizer and everyone doesn't need to annotate. And I remember the looks on their faces when we said that. I'm like, that's all you need to do. Let's just start there, right? Everybody doesn't need to annotate or read aloud or write the paragraph. What else can we have them do to show what they know that's more visual? And that's where they got going and started to embrace it, and then got excited about the color-coded sticky notes, right? And using those as reminders. And I think you can present the data that way when you see some strong patterns in the data, and that's where the leadership comes in.
And I think it's helpful too, knowing your staff's cognitive skills. When you got a group that isn't as good at flexible thinking, where are their strengths so that you can tap into that, so they have a more receptive approach to, oh, wait, as Nancy said, like, oh, I can do a graphic organizer. Like, they're doing it, but they don't have the language behind it to understand that they're doing it sometimes.
And I'll add in here from our early implementation, the Mindprint team has a tremendous library of resources already just in the partnership that surrounding instructional strategies that, you know, if this is a cognitive strength, then here are strategies to support accessing content or activities, maximizing that strength. But then here are some resources if this is a challenge for your students. If this specific area is a challenge, here are some strategies or activities that can help improve that student. That's one of the short and long-term goals of our implementation, is to shift this ownership of understanding their cognitive learning strengths and challenges to the student, so that the student now has improved their toolbox of skills when encountered with something that is a challenge to a way that they normally think or do. Now they know some skills to help them overcome that. So when our students encounter some of those DOK 2s and 3s and they struggle with flexible thinking, now they're equipped with strategies to help them do that. So our long term is to continue to work with our teachers and our students through training, through the boost courses and things, so that they can build their own capacity of applying skills to be more efficient and effective in their work. And in our early implementation phase and working with our teachers, we, in addition to just what's already available, we've also partnered with Mindprint to come in and help train our staff, and we've actually intentionally built that into our PLC cycles, so that it's just something we're going to take a series of strategies that we've identified are some of the primary ones, for instance, flexible thinking or working memory, and we've taken a look at just analyzing that data, how to look at your classroom and how your classroom is broken up based on the assessment results and their skills, and just looking at strategies, instructional strategies that can be effective in doing that to help prepare them. And then we take ownership at the school level to now follow through and look at that. So the early phase is kind of leaning in on Mindprint's partnership, but we have some long-term goals on that as well.
Mhm.
The only
Leanne?
thing I would add to that, if it's okay, Melissa, to jump
Yeah,
in,
please.
is that, and Greg and Leanne will correct me if I say something that is not true, is that rarely do we bring a strategy to the teachers that they haven't seen before or know how to do. It's, we're telling them, we're helping them just be more deliberate and using the data to justify it. We're just not saying, go do this. It's taking the data, saying, here, we're showing you the data. This is why we're going to do it. But really, you don't need to go back to the data so much as just embrace the strategy, because now you understand why it's so likely to be more effective. And I think that really helps teachers. And that's why I bring up the example of the graphic organizer versus annotating. Every English teacher has used both, but they tend to require, in some cases, some teachers like to require you must annotate, or you must, stop and write one sentence. And just opening their minds to, there is a reason to give students another approach, I think really helps. So they're not learning anything new, they're just being more deliberate based on the data. I'm seeing nods from Leanne and Greg, so I got that right?
Yep. And Melissa, I saw a question earlier that I think Susan answered, but I thought it was something that would be worthwhile of sharing. For those that might have a question about, I think I was saying survey, but it's the cognitive assessment that the students take. That's the Mindprint assessment. If some had kind of a question about what's the demand to have that done or completed, it literally, we took, we planned to do this assessment on one day, and it took one instructional period. And we kind of did it in sort of like a homeroom kind of scenario, assigned the assessment, students completed it, and we moved on our day. This was not one of those things that we had to have a significant schedule change, and it's not a half day kind of testing scenario. It's really, really not disruptive to your normal operation to get really valuable information.
Mhm. Well, and the thing I'm thinking about, well, I'll answer this question or I'll put this question out there in just a second that just came in through the Q&A, but it's not only that you guys are doing this to empower and encourage your teachers and your students, but and to get these academic math outcomes that you want, right? But what I'm hearing is that, you're really giving these students the gift of learning that they're carrying on with them. So you're starting in middle school to hope that carries over into high school, to hope that carries on later in life, and just having that awareness. I mean, I say this joke all the time. I don't think I really learned how I learned best until like my junior year of college. So, it's all trial and error, right? And you're sort of giving that gift to your students to say, no, here in elementary school or middle school, high school, this is how, you learn best. And these are the strategies you need to use. And it may or may not be like your sibling or, a parent or whoever it is in their, that's an influence in their life and trying to help support them. But they've got this personalized plan now of what to do. And the teachers kind of are on track to say, hey, I'm gonna keep beating my head against the wall, trying the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. They now have a plan of action, and to get that. So I love hearing these encouraging stories. The one question that came in was like, hey, how is this different than iReady? You want to answer that?
So the way I look at it, the number one most important factor in impacting a child's academic success is the classroom teacher in front of them. No machine can ever do that. I don't care how many AI algorithms are underlining it. iReady has its place and has its purpose. What we're looking to do is really to make sure our professional staff have the skills to recognize. We're all awash in data. All of us, we get tons of data all the time. What Mindprint has allowed us to do is to have that conversation. This has made data much more manageable for my classroom teachers to impact their professional approach in instructing students where each individual student needs to be. You know, it actually makes the difference with the classroom teacher and that interaction with every individual student. So, you know, that's where I see the difference with us. We don't use iReady. I know what iReady is, but that's where I want to make the impact, is with my classroom teachers and the experience my children are having with the classroom teacher that's in front of them.
I would echo Leanne. We're not an iReady district, but I have used it in previous districts. So if they have developed more than my last experience, I definitely apologize. But my interpretation would be iReady is more of a content platform that can, through a diagnostic, create individual learning pathways for students to work through content. Mindprint is more of a cognitive assessment about the learner, not about content. What you learn about the learner would apply to every instructional setting that student would go to. So this could be applicable to a student sitting in band as much as it would be in Algebra 1. Because it's information about the learner. This isn't going to instruct you. This isn't something that they could log in and it's going to give them a pathway to learn skills in a particular content area. Yes, exactly, Sylvia. It's a cognitive assessment, not a content assessment, and it is most informative actually for both the student, because as the student becomes aware of how they best learn and strategies to support that, and how they are challenged in learning and strategies to support that, it's effective. And then the teacher the same. For us, it's unlocking much more meaningful differentiation. We've thrown that differentiation word around in education for 20 years. And I think it's been poorly done. I think we say we do it, and it's just poorly done. And we throw content at kids 14 different ways, and it's not a content problem. It's a learning problem. And it doesn't mean they're deficient. It means we're not engaging them in the way that their brain could best process it, so that now they can apply it in different contexts. So that's really our biggest aha in all of that.
Awesome. All right, well, any final last words? We are so appreciative of you both being here today, and Nancy as well. And we're hopeful that if you'd like more information, you can head over to, you can either contact me, Melissa at mindprintlearning.com, or Nancy at mindprintlearning.com. We try to keep it as simple and easy as possible for you to reach us, just that first name, plug that in. And or you could always hop over to our website, mindprintlearning.com. If you're interested in any of our other Science of Learning webinars, we have those on our YouTube channel. We'll be sharing those, we'll be sharing that link with you in the resource follow-up email that you'll be receiving next week. But thank you again, Greg, Leanne, and for just sharing this information with the education community and answering the question, you know, how does this student learn? And let's keep asking it and dig deeper and make decisions based on that. So thank you for the work that you're doing in this space to empower your staff and your students. And hope you have a great weekend. Thank you so much.